They made a good case for Apple Silicon. I think they're preparing the way for the battle, the next Intel battle or whoever, that this is the fastest chip architecture available anywhere.
Well, there's no battle. The battle is yet to be seen, but I doubt it will be with Intel.
What bothers me is...
Whoops, he must have gotten called away. I hope everything's okay.
What bothers me is when I get called away too.
Can you please check your Discord?
I'm back. Sorry about that.
That's okay, Chris. We missed you. We were hoping nothing was wrong.
No, everything's... Yesterday was rough. Today's fine.
Excellent.
Chris, could you check? Could you check your Discord?
Look at that. Little red dots.
I was terribly disappointed yesterday that there were no new watch straps. I was hoping for some.
Yeah,
I
can see. Do
I was thinking yellow and blue.
Do they still have the $10,000 top gold and whatever it is? There used to be one on Watch Band that was for people who were seriously into conspicuous consumption. It's interesting that they're making these out of all that aluminum now too. So these are going to be reasonably recyclable.
Oh, highly recyclable.
So it's good. Now you can drink beer without guilt because you know that eventually it's going to end up in somebody's Mac Mini.
2-minute warning.
You know, I think it's actually a different grade of aluminum. So you can buy a Mac and give it back to Apple with relative certainty that it will be made into another Mac. I don't think they're stripping off Budweiser cans.
They can't melt it down and realloy it somehow into what they want. Yeah.
It's just a matter of quality, right? Energy in and energy out.
There you go. Makes sense.
Also depends on the hard anodizing they're using for the coating.
Well, and if you think about, the amount of aluminum in a can versus the, whatever the sealant is on the inside and having to strip the labeling on the outside.
My head is going to explode.
Don't do that. We're about to be on YouTube.
Alex has been coming in close to the time, so I'm not going to panic until we get down to 3 seconds.
Tex, if you're listening, I know it's the middle of the night. Your promo is awesome.
He just went to bed, he told me.
Yeah. Well, it's excellent.
I just put the question in. So if you want to see it, maybe John could show it if people want to vote it up.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to Office Hours. If you are watching on YouTube, you can find out more about what we do at officehours.global. First hour is general discussion about media and virtual production. Second hour is about things that we want to spend a little bit more time on. Today, we're going to talk a little bit about Supersources, just the backgrounds, not the design. We're working on backgrounds for ours, and I figured if we're going to figure it out, we'll figure it out together. So we're going to be doing that at the second hour for tomorrow. We'll have Jeffrey Orthwine and Andrew Sullivan in, and they're going to talk about their movie. We did that a couple weeks ago. It was great. So they're going to talk more about pre-visualization and planning as they get ready to shoot later this month. So it should be a lot of fun. And then on Friday, we have AI Media here. They specialize in captions. really, I mean, they're like the global leader in captions. So we're going to talk to them about the technology behind captions and the process and all the bits and pieces around that. So it should be a really interesting Saturday. Of course, we have education for the second 2 hours. And then at 10 o'clock, and that's not on YouTube, you have to join. It's a great conversation. And then at 10 o'clock, we will continue part 2 of the Maker Bit. We had so much fun last Saturday, and this Saturday we'll be programming, so it should be a good time. And then on at noon, remember that Todd Reynolds will be having his own concert, the Todd Reynolds Experience, and so you should definitely check that out as well. And then Sunday, of course, we have our more philosophical talk. And a quick reminder that going out in the email with everything else is a link to get Stream Voodoo for 60 days for free. And I would highly recommend it. We want to bang on it as a group and just kind of figure out what else we want to add to it. We have a unique opportunity to guide the development of the product. And so I would highly recommend checking out that link. All right, let's go ahead and jump into the questions. Bill, what do we have?
Absolutely. Paul Wallace starts us off this morning from Austin, Texas, and he says, how do you evaluate whether to buy a Mac Mini M1 versus one of the new MacStudios?
Go ahead, Jason.
Well, it's really just a matter of, would you like screaming fast or like, break the sound barrier fast? It's just a matter of, the way that you look at it and how much money you have.
Go ahead, Mitchell.
Well, you need to know what you're going to use it for. An M1 may just be fine, but the new MacStudio might be exactly what you need if you have an editing suite. The M1 could come pretty close to that, but I think that when they were doing the design, I get the sneaky suspicion that the MacStudio is the upgraded M1 Mini, just one on steroids. So, like Jason just said, if you need something faster, the MacStudio is bound to cover. In fact, it's supposed to be faster than anything out there.
Go ahead, George.
So I would say add to it. Definitely, a lot of us have struggled with the M1s as far as display output. So for me, it's a no-brainer to move to a larger unit as my main machine. So I would go to the Studio versus the M1 because of the display outputs. You get 4.
Yeah, go ahead, Nigel.
It's a sickness. I always buy the most powerful that I can afford to get at any point because I think that's better. But I was also attracted by the I/O here. There's a lot more I/O. Well, you can dongle your way through that on an M1. At some point, you're not really being effective. And I think both the front and back on the Ultra, I believe, is Thunderbolt. So I really like that approach. I like the amount of memory. But at the end of the day, it's what you can afford and the ROI you're going to get from it.
Yeah, go ahead, Bill.
So for me, it's a matter of whether or not the tasks that I perform most regularly, particularly in terms of efficiency and getting my work done, whether one machine is going to give me a true productivity boost. And by that, I mean, in the old days when we used to have to render, maybe something would take an hour to render. If you could cut that down to 15 minutes, that was a tremendous time saver. And if you're on deadline trying to push work to a client, that 45 minutes can be huge. In the later eras, all of a sudden, those increases were getting you from 10 minutes down to 5 minutes or from 5 minutes down to 2.5 minutes. And that is not enough productivity boost in my thinking to completely revise my machine. So it's a process for me of just saying, looking at how that machine fits into the work that I most often need to do. And am I buying it just for bragging rights or am I buying it for actual productivity that I can turn into money and additional sales?
Yeah. And also you want to think about, we probably have a Mac Pro coming out in the fall. So, that's one of the things that weighed on me is do I want to go all in on an Ultra when I know that something else is down the path? So next question.
Mitchell Hill, Wilmington, Delaware is up next. Now that Apple has released the MacStudio, I'd like the Office Hours panel to help me configure it for my edit suite. Any suggestions are welcome.
Go ahead, Mitchell.
Yeah, I was sitting on the Apple Store and I was poised to hit the button. Oh, and the sounds happened right there. And I thought, well, maybe you should throw this to the panel. The panel is going to have a lot of good input. So I'm looking to upgrade my edit suite. And, anything I get is going to be better than my 2015 Mac Pro. But I want to make the right decision. And the presenter on the Apple event yesterday said, the very last things he said after presenting the MacStudio was, and the Mac Pro, we'll leave that for another time. So like Alex, I don't know whether I'm hedging my bets by buying now or waiting till when? This fall?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the if I was doing Cinema 4D, for instance, I know that you use Cinema 4D. If I was using Cinema 4D as a business, I would probably buy the Ultra because we already know that Maxon has spent a lot of effort on upgrading, basically making sure that it's maximizing the output from, from the computer. So I think that would lean heavily on my tendency to get a lot of RAM, get a lot of things that let Cinema 4D run really fast. Same thing with Resolve and Final Cut. I think that both of those are going to take Final Cut, Motion. Those are going to take a lot of advantage. So if you're doing day-to-day, I don't know how well the Adobe suite will take full advantage of the system from day one. It's a lot of code. They have a lot of technical debt. And so so I'm not sure if they'll leap forward as far as we see things like Resolve, Final Cut, Cinema 4D, that type of thing will be a little bit different. Go ahead, Bill.
Well, I'm just also thinking about the resale value of things. I mean, they're coming out with these new machines at such a rapid pace. And there's a perception, I think, in the market that a lot of people want the latest and greatest because of these significant leaps in actual power. So if you buy now and you move into the studio zone, exactly what people are talking about, when the Pro comes out, you're going to have to make a slightly harder decision about whether or not that's a justified purchase to jump the distance from a studio to a Pro rather than from, for example, a year-old or two-year-old laptop to a Pro or a studio, which seems to be a bigger deal.
And this goes back to if I was doing 3D as a business, like a lot of 3D, I'd be still tempted to get the Ultra because you can always make it a render node. You can always be rendering out to it as a separate unit. Go ahead, Sky.
Well, and I noticed the marketing yesterday, they're really embracing not just the professional, but everybody, because there was a lot of time spent on the creatives and aiming and focusing towards that as their core market. And again, it may not be their core market, but it's the people that do the marketing and consequently brag about the tools they use.
Well, it's going to become an uphill battle for creatives to stay on PCs. especially the ones that left. The ones that left went to the Mac. I went to the PCs from the Mac. It's going to be harder and harder for them to justify because it's so much power. And their PCs are not going to be able to keep up at the same price. Like I don't know if once the computers start shipping, they're going to start taking, a $5,000 MacStudio and comparing them to $5,000 PCs. And I don't think that it's going to be super competitive. Go ahead, Courtney.
Well, we'll have to see. The new processors from Intel are kind of based on the same kind of similar architecture, multi performance cores and economy cores. We'll see how they do. They're just now getting into the market. But what I was going to say is I wouldn't expect the Mac Pro with an M2 processor until next year, probably at the earliest, because I see the Ultra as an introduction as a stopgap product. And they just didn't have to redesign the chips. They just stuck to them on the same substrate and changed the microcode to handle traffic. So they didn't have to design a new chip from the ground up or a new architecture. And I think they're still working on M2, but I don't think it's going to come out this year. That's why they came out with this Ultra as a stopgap to give somebody a definite boost in performance without having to redesign the whole chip and release that without all of its implications and having to rewrite a lot of code.
I think that the chips were decided a long time ago, and I don't think there's any part of this roadmap that was a stopgap. I think that this is a mechanical process of how to maximize the return on the chips before you move on to the next one. I mean, I think it's just a matter of making sure that you get all the money out of the chip fab before the new fab before you have to re-gear. And I'm going to guess that the 2 point, I don't think there's anything about this rollout so far that we've seen that looks like anybody's behind or anybody is looking for anything. I think they know how to get the most out of of their initial investment. And I think that, again, I think the problem that Intel is going to have is that they have to negotiate with everybody else. Part of what makes this work is you have to own the board, you have to own the operating system, and you have to own the chip fab. And nobody in the world owns that except for Apple. And that makes it really hard to build this efficient pipeline. Nigel? Yeah,
I was going to say that I think if you're building a microprocessor line, you're thinking 4 years ahead minimum. So they know what the next 3 or 4 of these are going to be, particularly as they change processors, they go through it. I think the challenge for Intel is always going to be the amount of legacy stuff those processors have to run. And when they decide they're going to cut loose from old versions of operating systems and old instructions, and that will be the real break point. Also on the Pro subject, I think you can probably think that the Ultra is sort of an entry point of 4,000, which means the Pro is probably going to have an entry point of 8 to 9,000. So if that's more than you're ever going to want to spend, which is exactly where I am, well, the Ultra is going to be replaced by an Ultra with an M2 at some point or an M3 at some point. I'm never going to jump to the Pro. I never have that need. So the Ultra is probably the right place for me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Go ahead, Chris.
I also think it's interesting, the branding of Studio. You know, if you went back 20 years, I think a lot of people looked at a Macintosh as, you know, it's just a Mac, you know, and to start branding them back then as MacBook Pro and Mac Pro, I mean, you're making a statement. And I don't know, I think that a lot of consumers will look at things and go, oh, I'm not a professional. I just need something to play a game on or to check my email with. And branding it by calling it a studio, it's a huge homage to, or statement to, all creatives. And I think that in regards to people that, you know, maybe at some point got upset with Apple, I know certain people very publicly that have like, Apple don't know what they're doing, I'm going to Windows. I think there's going to be a lot of ruining. You know, they're ruining the day. They're ruining the day they made that decision.
Mm-hmm.
And
I mean, I will say that as Mac users, I mean, to your point, we spend a lot of time going, well, it's not as fast, but it's a Mac. like, you know, like it's still, you know, it's not as, the performance isn't there. It doesn't trim the same way, but it, you know, it's still a Mac operating system. I'm okay with that.
Well, there's also a lot of learning curve stuff. If you jump around willy-nilly, I'll say, I'm going to bring that word back, willy-nilly. If you just like hop around with the wind, there's so much just behind the scenes stuff you have to figure out, well, how am I going to do this and how am I going to do this? I think that regardless of performance and capabilities, my own choice to just stick hardcore with the Mac over the last 33 years, that's when I bought my first computer. I was kind of late. It's paid off well for me. And there have been times when I had absolutely the best computers on the planet. And then there's times where it's like, well, you know, they'll figure out that round Mac Pro problem.
Right. Yeah. Mitchell, wrap it up.
Yeah, it was interesting. I think I got my money's worth out of my 2015 Mac Pro. And when I looked at the new Mac Pro that came out some years ago, I decided what I really liked about it was that I could, you know, buy that ProRes card for streaming, that were being able to play multiple tracks, and the same thing with the video cards. Well, all that's now on the M1 chip, so that's kind of what's leaning me towards it. I don't care necessarily that the render speed might be a little bit quicker. I care how snappy it is when I use it.
Right. Next question.
Andy Kokendorfer in Vieira, Florida is up next. He says, if using a Blackmagic Decklink card to output SDI from Zoom ISO on a Mac, what type of enclosure do you recommend? Thanks.
Go ahead, George.
So for years now, I've been using the Sonic enclosures. They have a couple of different versions. It's hands down the best enclosure you can get, and they have a pretty extensive testing process. So I would go that route. It's really the only one that's really, you know, fit the market right now in the Decklink cards.
Yeah, go ahead, Jason.
Sonic is by all means the gold standard. I have never, ever had the Blackmagic fail on me. And I can just tell you, if you look at the graphic, you'll find that a locking Thunderbolt is a pretty good thing. Also, the the power supply is a standard 6-pin like you'd get from any power supply, you know, from a normal PC. It's a wonderful device, and it's completely solid, in my opinion.
Yeah, and there's two versions of the Sonnet. There's one that's a rack mountable, which is a lot more expensive, but you can find them on eBay. And then there are the little boxes that you can put next to your computer. We use the little boxes because I didn't want to spend the money on the rack mountable one. So we're using 5 of those little boxes with that are holding our Blackmagic cards. Next question.
John Pewitt in Huntersville, North Carolina, said, what can I do with a MixPre 6.2 that I couldn't do with a MixPre 3.2?
Go ahead, Courtney.
Well, I guess the main thing would be ambisonic recording because it requires 4 microphones. If you do a lot of that for environmental recording for backgrounds and things like that, you can do that with a 6. Or if you're using your mix pre in a situation where you're doing a podcast with multiple people and you want to do an auto mix, the 6 would be better at handling multiple microphones. Of course, you can handle up to 10 tracks of record and six preamps simultaneously. So you can do that. Other than that, I think quality-wise, they're very similar, and they both do 32-bit float recording, and they both have the same quality preamps. So
good, George.
So Courtney has covered domains, which you can do with it if you're in office hours and you have a 6. You could bring 3 feeds of Dante into it with dongles. I have my one mic going in, and then I have 3 dongles coming in and 1 going out. So you could kind of build out a little Dante workflow with your mix pre 6 or above if you want to be experimental.
And you're saying the Dante, you're using the Avios, there's not Dante directly in it.
Not directly. I'm using the Avios to go in and out.
Yeah, go ahead, Chris.
Outputs. I buy mixers almost more for the outputs than the inputs, and the 6 has a lot more outputs than the 3.
Does it have a lot more outputs? I thought it was the big jump was the 10 is when it. Because you got XLR output, you balanced outputs.
I'll double check, but I think it's at least double. So if double is a lot more, then yes, it has a lot more.
But the big jump in outputs is 10. The Mix Pre 10 is where you get XLR, you get balanced outputs, I believe. Next question.
Jonas Natel, Stuttgart, Germany. What lights do people use, and how do you control them?
Go ahead, John.
Thank you, Jonas. I've got 8 DMX lights here. All my colored lights, the Fenwick Ice Blue and the pinks and the greens are all American DJ, but they're the higher end American DJ. American DJ has low end, and they've got some higher end stuff. And then my white key light and fill light are ICANN. And then I control with the NTEC controller and Luminaire on the iPad.
Go ahead, Nigel.
Yes, Elgato key lights, Elgato key light minis behind me, controlled from my Stream Deck on a single button, probably closer to the $5,000 studio than the DMX stuff.
Hey, go ahead, Courtney.
I'm using the Noir panel light. Sorry, looks a bit like that. And for my background lights, I'm using these Daybetter. They're Wi-Fi controllable color lights. I can just talk to the Amazon Echo and set them to any color I want. And of course, I have the sunlight.
Go ahead, Mitchell.
I have the light panel. Astra is my key light. It's a soft light, which is real nice. And everything else around me, including my fill, my hair light, and a light bar, are all NAND lights. And I control them all with this little gadget here, which is handy. It's like $90 on B&H, and it controls everything.
I have 3 Nanlite 100Bs in front of me, 168B over top of me, and mixed panel 60 behind me. Next question.
Danny Law in Malaysia is up next. He says, being that the unveiling of the Mac Pro is to be held, quote, at another time, would you still spec out the MacStudio or just buy the baseline model of either MacStudio configuration?
Go ahead, Mitchell.
Well, it seems like the panel has spoken when I asked to configure what I'm going to buy, and it sounds like I want to go with an Ultra with 64 gigabytes of memory and a big 5 terabyte drive in it. I think that's the way to go. And whenever and if ever the Mac Pro comes out and looks like what we want, then I'll just retire this and move on.
Jason?
My personal sweet spot has always been Mac Minis for everything studio and office related, and the most powerful MacBook Pro that I can get. For anything in the field. The Mac Pro is a very specific use case. And unless you're, one of these guys that just wants to flex, I don't see a use for it unless you know you have a use for it.
Next question.
Guy Cochran in Seattle says, VMIX 25 released today. What's new?
I think we actually, that question got asked on a group that doesn't use VMIX. So I don't know if anybody here uses VMIX that heavily or watches it enough to know what the new features are. So it would be great to get the guys on from VMIX, or if people in our group wanted to jump on and talk about it. But I think that I don't want to try to go through it in just through graphics. So I'd be happy to give VMIX a second hour if there's people here that want to cover it, or people from VMIX that want to cover it. But so far, their time is offset, and I don't think they've decided we're a priority yet. So there you go. Next question.
Jonas Dattel in Stuttgart, Germany comes back with, who has seen the announced Middle Things remote? And if so, what do people think?
Go, Jason.
I think it's wonderful, and it's kind of what I liked about that video that Alex was talking about earlier is that they kind of buried the lead. A couple months prior, they quietly updated the their middle thing, and they did it hardline with CAN bus instead of that weird Bluetooth thing. They then, clearly were planning towards this working of, these modular connections that are just gorgeous. So yeah, pretty awesome.
It runs, it control. What's the price? Do we know what the price is on that, Jason?
I didn't look.
It runs on a, it runs a DJI, an RS2 or what I think is an RS2, which is
runs
only 1,000.
Runs all three current ones.
Up. So they're a PTZ head is only $1,000 a unit, and you could get 4 of those. And it'll control up to 4 of them at a time. Now I don't think it records presets. I don't think it's
1590 on the middle remote.
Oh yeah, so pretty interesting. It's a pretty interesting box, and a really good video, by the way, that they did about how the box works. Next question.
Sky Gleason in Seattle, Washington's up next with John Pretto. Can you share the Promo Tex created for this office hour space event?
Go ahead, John.
If Alex allows it, I will show it.
Yeah.
Sky threw me under the bus again today, huh?
Mm-hmm.
Can you talk about the Vegas rocket project?
The rocket's 12 feet tall. It's going to weigh in between 80 to 100 pounds. Our projected altitude is just under 15,000 feet.
A lot of people are talking about it. They're talking about it in education. They're talking about it with science.
And you guys will be able to see all this live, and then we're building a documentary, because the story isn't about the launch. The story is about our community and office hours and what's bringing all these people together and participating with the office hour community. That is the story, Tom.
Let's share again the actual date of the launch.
March 19th, 9 a.m., oh-space.com. The stream is going to start at 8 Pacific. And we've got tons of B-roll and interesting information leading up to the launch. Planning for the show, managing the show, pulling it off, and talk about the story of office hours.
That's great. Very, very well done. It's very cool.
That was done by Text, by the way. I wanted to give him credit down in Australia.
Nice. Sky, real quick.
Yes, Text Whitney. And there are other people that are joining in on the promotions concept. I believe that's going to be on Instagram. So we'd love everybody to spread the word.
Yep.
Hit
Jason.
like. There's going to be more promos coming up. So stay tuned.
Jason.
The only thing that I would add to that is it's already better as far as production value is concerned than your average SpaceX anything.
Next question.
Next question comes to us from Braden in Moncton, Canada. And he says, what are the panel's opinions on the new Apple Studio display? Is it worth the $1,600 US price tag for what it offers?
Go ahead, Tom.
I think it's worth the money. I'm going to go ahead and order one. I've been disappointed with the LG Ultrafine 5K. It's still on the Apple Store for $12.99. The LG surprised me when I first bought it, hooked up a laptop to it, and then when the screen saver came on, the backups ceased because it also blanked out all the ports on the back. So I'm hoping the Apple monitor doesn't do that.
Right. Yeah, that'd be good. Go ahead, Jason.
Absolutely worth it. I have the LG 5K right in front of me. It's getting a little flickery, a little bit weird. Mine was not one of the ones that had, that weird Wi-Fi issue. But yeah, no, it's worth it. Or just buy a Dell and be happy with it.
Go ahead, Mitchell.
I think I read somewhere that LG is making that Apple display. So draw your own conclusions.
Well, the panel, the LCD maybe.
Yeah, the LCD. But the main thing is that for an Apple user, I probably won't buy one because I want to have a monitor in front of me that I can route lots of things, the switcher and this and that and the other thing, into it. And I don't think that will be the right display for that. But I think that for many people who want to get the full value out of their Ultra or their Mac, their Studio, having something that's really, when I buy monitors, it's really hard to find any monitor that really works well with a Mac. Like they're all kind of like, And I think this might be a place where Apple pivoted. I also think that we talked about it on Mac Break a little bit yesterday. I think it's really interesting that there's an A13 chip in there. That's the same chip used in the 4K Apple TV. There's no reason.
Apple TV. Please be an Apple TV. Please be an Apple.
I feel like they're taking a step towards a TV. That just has the processing in it. In fact, this monitor could have an update where it just went, and it can be an Apple TV when you're not using it, when you're not using your computer. You can be rendering into your computer and watching TV. So I think that's quite possible. Next question.
Danny Law in Malaysia is up next. He says, which configuration would suffice if the primary use is to output multiple video program mixes to different displays, projectors, LED video walls, processors, and so forth, and to a hardware live stream encoder from the MacStudio?
Go ahead, Jason.
Bare minimum will do that all day, every day.
Yeah, I don't think you need anything more than the minimum to make that work. Next question.
Tony Mobley in Noonan, Georgia is up next. What's the panel's thoughts on the iMovie update?
Jason.
iMovie is the world's greatest gateway drug to Final Cut, and it's an excellent product on any mobile device.
I didn't know there was an update. So Tony, there's an
update. They did previs. They just add a little feature.
Oh, that was it?
Yeah, it's coming out in next month, April.
Okay.
That's when they're launching the new iMovie update.
Cool. Yeah, I don't know anything about it. Next question.
TJ Asher in Minneapolis, Minnesota. Next, what series of adapters can I use to drive an older DVI monitor from the newer Mac Minis or MacStudio with Thunderbolt outputs?
Go ahead, Courtney.
There's a variety of adapters that are out there that you can get them on Amazon for like $15, designed to work with the older, USB-C with DisplayPort MacBooks, which should work fine with your DVI monitor. It's just a built-in cable with a USB-C connector on the end of it.
Yeah, Jason.
Because of the oddities and the number of DVI variants that there have quietly been over the years, I think there's only one right way to do this, which is the OWC Thunderbolt to either DisplayPort or HDMI, and then whatever you want to go to DVI.
Yep. Next question.
Mitchell Hill in Wilmington, Delaware says, can we talk at the Apple Peak event on Tuesday and the many implications that it has for our business?
I don't know if it has a lot of implications. Well, I guess what I would say, we'll get out of the actual discussion about the products, because I think we've nailed those to the ground. But if we talk about the event itself, I actually think it was the keynote itself was a big step backwards. So I think that Apple was continually making their keynotes better, more watchable, more interesting, and then they step back towards kind of a stage paradigm. And I get that they're getting ready to come out of pandemic. I think the problem is they opened up Pandora's box, like in the sense that they can't put it back in. We were used to a real video production, and what we got was something else, that was less than, and I think it was slow. I think it was, I think that it was, the products were great, but if I wasn't watching it with everybody here, and if I wasn't watching this in after hours and I didn't have to cover it right afterwards with Mac Break, I would totally watch just the highlight reel. Like I didn't need, that as a regular consumer watching it, I think it was a waste of time, and I didn't say that. I mean, I really felt like we kept on seeing it get the event get better and better and better as they slowly it felt like they were stepping away from the stage experience and towards just a great show about what's happening next. And I think they went backwards, in this one. And so I think that I think that they'll probably go backwards one more time, and then they'll start going forward again, because I think they're going to realize that it just is really old feeling now. What we used to have, we can't go back to the before days. Go ahead, Mitchell.
Yeah, it's sort of like the Avengers movies. Some of them are better than others, and I think this was like one of the less than good ones. A lot of flash, a lot of sizzle, not a lot of good information. The only thing that I heard that I thought was good was the guy saying, but the Mac Pro is a different story. We'll talk about that another time, or something to that effect.
Yeah, but I think that was the problem. There wasn't a lot of flash. There was not, like we kept on doing these stage things, and I was just kind of like, we were having a great time traveling all over California and doing cool things and showing off, more labs and doing all these other things that were much more interesting than a stage, and now we're back to a stage, and this is someone I've streamed hundreds of keynotes for different companies. And every time I sat back there like, okay, so let's get this done. Go ahead, Bill.
So I'm gonna take a weird tack on this. This was Apple's work from home presentation. The Apple Studio, to me, is the ultimate work from home thing. They're saying that you are the studio now. You put this on your desk. You do not need to go into a different option to get your creative work done. Everybody is interconnected. They have been designing these things in that realm. I mean, the entire Apple crew has been work from home, working virtual, like we discuss things on office hours every single day. And so to me, that was what's transformative about the Peak event.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just talking about the event itself, though. We'll keep it focused away from the products because I think we've talked about the products like half the show. So I think that the event itself, though, I think was, pushes our whole industry backwards, because Apple leads the industry. That's why I was kind of frustrated by it. And why I've taken a little bit of a turn on Twitter about it is because I think that we got to keep moving forward and away from the old ways of doing things. Go ahead, Chris.
And not only was it a step backwards, but it was like a really hard, jarring step backwards to see Tim alone on a wide shot showing empty chairs in the theater. It's just like, what are you doing? This is dismal. I thought it was horrible.
Yeah, George.
Just real quick, I didn't think it helped either, that stage at one point. I guess it was a dark in color, so it really kind of felt that he was just it's like being in a big football field and it's just one person just standing there. So like Chris said, I think it didn't do him any justice with the stage being dark also, as far as the
unlit
flooring.
Football field.
Yeah. It was so, and Apple doesn't take very many miscues with their keynotes. And I think that they have, over the last couple of years, have progressively gotten better. And during COVID, got huge leaps and bounds forward. And I get that they're preparing to probably go back to a stage event. And I think they'll do one stage event with people in the audience, and then they'll start turning the other direction again, because I think that they're going to get more and more of like, hey, this is really boring. Because they're all really boring, like keynotes are really boring in general. The reason I think that people thought that it was all the pomp and circumstance, people just care about Apple keynotes because there's great products. Like I don't watch other people's keynotes because they're both boring. They have bad LED walls, unprofessional presenters, and products I don't really care about. so I just wait for the highlights. So I think that the keynote era is almost over. The way we've had them, keynotes on stage, I think are nearing the end. Go ahead, George.
Alex, can I just say, I was just down in Florida, Orlando for an event that I streamed out. And I think all of us have seen it, and you have a great point. When I looked at that event, most of the event and what was said is, oh my God, I'm happy to see you guys in person again. And that's really what they were able to say. I mean, it was content there, but it was like, oh my God, I'm so happy to see you in person. So a lot of it doesn't really make any sense to have these huge events, with a lot of people, because it's really all about the networking. And, if that's all it's going to be, it doesn't make sense to travel for something. It's like, I'm struggling right now whether I'm going to go to NAB or not, because it's like, why am I really going?
Right. Well, and I think Panasonic did a great job. I think Panasonic is the step forward. Like when they did 10 minutes of this is what our new camera is, and then they opened it up for Q&A, that was a great model. Now, I don't think Apple can open up for Q&A, but I think that, the idea that I'm going to give you a really concise view of that, I think made a big difference. Next question.
Tony Mobley in Noonan, Georgia, up next for office hours shows like Birding or Todd Reynolds and Conversations with Tony Mobley. Does the Mac Mini M1 continue to be a great computer, or is there a need to upgrade to one of Apple's more powerful computers?
Go ahead, George.
Tony, if you're just talking about the computer that I'm using here, let's say that the M1 I'm using here is the 16 gig. I am about 25% right now. I have 4 tabs open, the Zoom window and Unity. So as Alex always says, you have to have 50%, don't try to go over. So I'm still within that 25% until I reach 50. So the basic M1 is really all you really need if you're not really doing any kind of production work. If you're just the host, that's all you really need is a basic M1.
And if you look at a reasonably built out studio, which I did get, I ordered one with the Max chip. I could have bought 3 or 4 Mac Minis. I need one computer that has all that I/O and has all the stuff, so that's why it makes sense for me. but you can buy a lot of individual computers to do a lot of different things if you for the same price. Next question.
James Hutchinson in Dublin, Ireland asks, do you think Johnny Ive would have ever let Apple release a product with the industrial design of the new MacStudio? I suspect not.
Go ahead, Jason.
Although I have no idea, I am positive that he never would have permitted that weird Alice in Wonderland tumbling through the circles thing. But I don't know about the design. Whatever.
Yeah, go ahead, John.
I looked at it really hard yesterday and saw this giant thing with the giant 4,000 holes on the back. And it's like, how many iterations of bigger fans did they try before they got it right?
I think they just should have either made it a little bit smaller so that it would fit into 2U, or just go all the way for 3U and make it a cube, like the new cube. Like that's all. They just could go one way or the other. But now it's literally like a razor. It's like a 1/4 of an inch too high to make it a 2U unit. So it's now going to have all this air gaps above everything in everybody's rack servers. Next question.
Jack B. in Phoenix, Arizona says, does Office Hours have a plan to eventually provide closed captions for future iterations of the show? I often watch programming without audio for various reasons and would love to see this in the future.
Yes. Yeah, we're absolutely going to do that. First, we're going to get it working completely. And then we're going to, but we'll definitely add captions. Unless we find a sponsor for it, it'll most likely be some version of an automated caption system that we'll do. But yeah, absolutely. Next question.
James Hutchinson in Dublin, Ireland up next. Do you think if Steve Jobs were still alive that Apple would have so many SKUs for each product line, SKUs?
Go ahead, Nigel.
So there's always a tension between too few and too many in a product management team. And my experience is that the too few is much easier from a manufacturing and scheduling. And the too many typically happens when you have psychographic segmentations, which people think are effective. I would tell you that my experience is there are probably a few reasons to have more, and they don't always apply to Apple. One, they make it simpler to order. Apple's ordering is pretty easy. Two, there's a specific competitive pressure you're trying to aim a product at. Three, you have a specific technology that you're trying to sell in a package. And four, you lost control of your product management team.
Go ahead, Courtney.
Yeah, as Apple has moved more and more to a monolithic chip type, non-upgradable in any way, even non-factory upgradable, you're going to have separate SKUs for different amounts of RAM, different amounts of processor, different amounts of, on substrate changes. So it's going to force you into multiple SKUs. So he would have probably had to acquiesce to the multiple SKUs if they want to go with this monolithic design.
And go ahead, Jason.
There's this infamous thing in the Isaacson biography where, he says enough is enough, and draws this cross and says, okay, home, pro, and what have you. I will remind you that Apple was nearly dead at that point. And also that even if he did hate it, I feel like there is an extremely cohesive argument for having $200 cycles all the way from whatever, $600 to, sky's the limit. And I think his team would have fought back and they would have won.
Mitchell?
It didn't work for Gil Amelio.
I think that I think Apple in the 90s, when we look back on that, it was pretty confusing. Even I knew a lot about Macs and I couldn't figure out what to buy. Like I didn't even understand, there was ones with DVDs and ones without DVDs. And there was so many SKUs. I think in my mind, there's 5. There's 5 SKUs. There's the Pro, there's the Studio, there's the Mini, there's the MacBook, there's the iMac. And the MacBook has different levels of it. And you could argue that the Studio and the Mini are the same. So they're kind of in that same area. And so there's different SKUs, but they all kind of are. I think it's a much simpler product line than anything that we saw in the 90s. The 90s was just chaos, like just complete chaos. Next question.
Chris Widener in Lafayette, Indiana says, if one were going to the dreaded in-person event, say in Kalamazoo, Michigan later this week, where's a good place in Discord to announce meetups?
I don't know if we really have a good place in Discord to announce meetups. Yeah, we'll have to think about that. Yeah, go ahead, Sky.
I just generally come on here and ask who wants to get together for coffee or beer. And
right.
I'm gonna be landing in certain parts of geography at some point, and so yeah, we should do a space.
Yeah, absolutely. Next question.
Tom Ferguson in Phoenix, Arizona asked the simple question, did anything really surprise you at the Apple event?
Good, Tom.
Well, what surprised me the most was John Tiernes talking about the move to Apple Silicon, saying just one more to go, the Mac Pro. And then you looked at the store and they killed the 27-inch iMac line. Only 24-inch all-in-ones for the future.
Right. Yeah. I think they're killing I think the iMac will stick around as the little all-in-one, but I think I think they've announced the end. Go ahead, Sky.
I think Bill Davis and I, and maybe Chris, were in the room when Apple announced to the Final Cut user group that they were changing from something that we were making a living at in Final Cut 7 to this Final Cut 10 or Final Cut X event. And I remember everybody going, huh? But yesterday, watching this event globally with you in this new format, I felt like I was in the same position of seeing something change. And so I don't know as much it was the Apple event, but how I perceived it, how I consumed it was the surprise for me. And it's like, we're continuing to change.
Yeah, go ahead, Mitchell.
MacStudio. I think it's basically an upgraded M1 Mac Mini, but it's on steroids.
Yeah, go ahead, John.
I have a question of theatrics, which is really surprising to me that the particularly the females take this very wide stance with their legs apart, like this says superhero stance. Obviously, they're trained. I'm just wondering if maybe Sky has some input on that. I don't know.
I think both of there was a lot of posturing in it, in the event itself, and so it was an interesting approach to that process.
And also the camera specific angles, the height of the camera, they were all very, very low, giving them authority looking down. But what I felt was awkward was John. His profile is not good at his age, and he was a bit bent over, and he was kind of hunched. It was like, give me authority.
Yeah, I think that the thing that surprised me the most about the Apple event was how much I dislike stage events. Like it just, I felt like I went into it thinking that, waiting for how much better it was going to be because every one of them had been better. And then I was really surprised at how it went backwards and how much I disliked it. Like I was like, if they do this 2 more times, I'm not going to watch it anymore.
As soon as you said that, they did a reenactment of a in case, but then they also did that faux, Alice in Wonderland thing too.
No, but that was horrible. So but I think that I'm literally going to stop watching them if they keep on going down this path. I can just find out what they released later. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael says, if you were building Office Hours 2.0 now, would you use MacStudios for the input nodes or stay with Mac Minis?
Mac Minis. And here's why, is because the Mac Minis are barely being hit by the thing. The problem right now, the limitation for our outputs is that Zoom will not let us output more than 4 outputs per unit, per node. So if we were able to do 8, the Mac Minis could still do it. The Mac Minis are running like 15% capacity right now, pushing 4 1080p's out. So I could still do it with the Mac Minis. There's nothing about what we're doing with Office Hours 2.0 that would require the new ones. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael says, Apple introduced an AMD W6600X graphics upgrade for the Intel Mac Pro. Considering the performance increase of Apple Silicon, why would anyone stay with Intel if they didn't have to?
Go ahead, Jason.
Douglas, I love that you asked this question because you are so centered around waves and plugins and that are the exact reason that an Intel-based architecture is persisting. So the answer is because it's what you use your computer for.
Yeah, go ahead, Peter.
Well, I can't say exactly what the application is. I still have some applications that will thoroughly drive graphics cards and unfortunately have not been performed rather poorly on the M1 architecture to the point where I don't want to move them just yet. But trust me, I'm looking at it.
Well, when you still have a bunch of Mac Pro users that still are using these cards, it doesn't cost them anything to build. They didn't build this card by AMD. They just introduced it as a new option. So it's just saying, hey, you now can make your current legacy computer work faster until the new one comes out.
If I wanted to install a new graphics card, I could, right?
Yeah. I do think that the big jump in the M1s, and this progression also increases the pressure on all the companies that are laggards in getting onto the M1 because they are going to see the Mac Pro coming, and they're like, I better be able to take full advantage of that, or there's going to be a lot of people moving around.
I'm actually hoping that for the other piece of work that I do that has nothing to do with using it as a graphics, but
right. My
other option is actually, and Nigel will laugh at this one, is getting a server with a RISC chip in it.
Right.
Because those are the next. That's the next real leap.
Right. Absolutely. Next question.
Alex 40 Golner in London says the next version of iMovie will have an AI-based editing feature. Point to a bunch of media and it will make selects and make a film, including music. Once you make changes, the music is edited to match the new duration. Thoughts?
Let's go through this pretty quickly. Go ahead, Mitchell.
As a former Final Cut 7 user, I didn't like what happened, and I don't like it happening with iMedia.
Go ahead.
iMovie, excuse me.
And that's exactly my point is this is not made for you, Mitchell. It's made for everybody else because Apple has a whole lot more customers than professionals, and they're happily ready to open the door for the world, not just a few.
Yeah, go ahead, Bill.
I do a good little bit of dynamic timeline management through the auditions feature in Final Cut, which is to say I put down alts of reads or alts of scenes for my clients, and by switching back and forth them incredibly quickly, I can play 4 different versions that are 4 different lengths to get client feedback on it. So in that sense, if they automate some of that, it would be really useful to me.
They're automating the whole edit. It's like this isn't a couple of versions. This is like I'll just throw those things in and we'll put something together for you.
Right. What I'm saying is, as a starting point, that helps me communicate with a client as a starting point. Then I do go in and tweak it myself.
Yeah. But you will be replaced. You will no longer be needed.
It won't. I don't think that the auto stuff is going to replace anybody. I just don't think it'll replace people that are making $15 an hour cutting videos, but it's not going to replace artisans that are putting it together. It's just a different market. It's a market of schlocky stuff. I mean, content is easy to watch or easy to make or easy to watch, but not both.
And so accountants are usually the ones that overrule the creatives.
Not where I work. All right. Next question.
Attila Atch in Ocean Shores, Australia says, any recommendations for closed back headphones with replaceable cables that are sub $300? He's replacing an old set of Fostex T40s.
Go ahead, George.
So the trusty 7506s from Sony, you could get one with a quick release cable on True Audio, TREW.com. So that's what I've been using, and I don't know if that's what Chris has on, but 7506s.
Next question.
Mike Mitchells in Washington, D.C. says, how was International Women's Day celebrated? What did panelists do to support how this relates to technology fields around the world?
Apple did a whole keynote that was almost all women, and we watched it. Like I barely take Christmas off, so I don't really pay much attention to days. Go ahead, Sky.
Madeline Smithberg will be doing a presentation on Kitsch TV, KITTCH, and so they're celebrating this exact topic for the whole month.
There you go. Next question.
Alex Forney Golner in London in the UK says the last Mac architecture question, how to support PCI cards, which is based on externalizing the Intel CPU bus. Will an Apple Silicon-based Mac Pro include a PCI expansion? Will Apple try to introduce a new bus standard or have 2-card expansion buses?
Go ahead, Jason.
My answer is the same way that an AMD PC can still support PCIe. It's enough of a standard that it truly is a standard. And will they include PCI expansion? Yes, I think that they will. Will they try to introduce something new? No, not without significant, outrageous buy-in from just about every manufacturer. And yeah, I doubt it, at least not initially.
Good, Peter.
No, they won't introduce a new bus standard. That would truly, to Jason's point, cause not only huge amounts of cost, but angst in the standards community around the world. But more to the point, if you look at the last rev on the MacBook Pro, where they literally stole one of the Thunderbolt 4 connections to go outboard to HDMI and a couple other things, they can steal one of those on these massive chips that they're building and basically externalize to a PCI bus quite straight up from that.
Go ahead, Mitchell?
2-card bus makes sense because it's a legacy product and many people have investments in them, and it's the only outside way that people can get high performance devices in. I think they're going to probably push people more using Thunderbolt to use out external devices.
Yeah, next question.
Tony Mobley in Noonan, Georgia says, is the new iPad Air and iPad Pro killer?
Go ahead, George.
Short answer is no. The screen alone on the iPad Pro is much superior.
Bill, real quick.
Same thing. No, but the one thing that they have done is said that the way forward is a USB-C port instead of the Lightning port, and I welcome that. It's a much better I/O device.
I think the iPad Air would solve the problem for 60% of the people that bought the iPad Pro. like it's not a killer, but I think that it gets close enough. I think most people aren't using the screens that way, but we'll see. Next question.
Andy Kokendorfer, Vier, Florida. Follow-up question: would it be better to use 2x4 Decklinks or a single 8 output Decklink or an 8x 1080p Zoom ISO output? He's worried about overloading the T3 port. Thanks.
Go ahead, Jason.
Every time I've done this, I've always used a pair of Duo 2s. And if you've ever tried to select that input using a Duo 2, you know exactly why you don't want to use any more than 4 outputs. It's too long of a list.
Zoom ISO is still limited to 4 outputs right now. 4 outputs at 1080p. So you don't need 2, and you don't need 8K, the 8K one, because it only does 4. That's a Zoom limitation. Hopefully, we'll see it get pulled back. Next question.
George Butters in Halifax, Nova Scotia says, how would you get audio from a video played into a Zoom meeting from OBS?
Loop back.
Yeah, loop back. Loop back or the vegetation thing. The banana.
The fruit company. Yeah.
No, it's not fruit because there's a potato. There's a potato, voice meter, the voice meter vegetation, voice meter forest, voice meter garden. That's what we should call it, voice meter garden. Go ahead, Chris.
Yeah, it's not entirely easy. There's a couple of things that you have to do. When you set up your scene in OBS, I don't think you need all the other stuff. Well, you might need loopback. But when you set up your scene, you have to tell it to send the audio out as a monitor output. And that's a couple of menus down after you've made that scene. And then you also have to go into your just sort of general settings in OBS and make sure that OBS's audio is going out to the right place where you want to send it. There's actually 2 places to do it. It's not intuitive. It made me lose the last bit of my hair.
Next question.
Guy Cochran in Seattle says, the former Newtek CEO Andrew Cross has become the CEO of Grass Valley. What does this mean to the industry? He's got a link there.
Go ahead, Mitchell.
I think they're going to chase black magic designs. I think that a lot of people are envious of what they're doing because of the broad range of customers that they have.
I think it does point you towards where the meat of the market is. The meat of the market, where the real value is not where Grass Valley was. Or is. So I think that Newtek is more representative of where the future is going. So I think that that's probably why they let him start to run with it. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael says, currently I have a 2013 Mac Pro with a 3.5 gigahertz 6-core Xenon, 32 gigabytes of RAM, and the 6 gigabyte ATI D700 GPU. For an audio person who uses a lot of software synths, would a 10-core MacStudio with the M1 Max and the 24-core GPU be sufficient?
Go ahead, Jason.
Will it be performant enough? Absolutely. But I'm going to answer your question with a question. Will all of your software synths, are you willing to accept the limitations of you can't just go in and use absolutely every plugin ever because it has to be written correctly for the M1?
Yeah, but I would say that it'll be plenty sufficient.
Oh yeah, it'll be plenty performant.
Yeah, Next question.
Paul Wallace in Austin, Texas is up next. He says, if you buy a MacStudio now, what's the percentage loss in value after 1 year? And what is it for a Mac Mini M1?
Go ahead, George.
It depends. I'm still using a 2012 Mac Mini, so I don't think it's too much value you're losing with Macs. They last forever.
Yeah, go ahead, Nigel.
Plan 40%. If it's better than that, you're lucky. If it's not, then at least you're prepared.
I don't sell my Macs. I just use them until they die, or I give them to other people or whatever. So I don't really track it that way. I still have Mac Minis that are running from 2012. Next question.
Paul Wallace in Austin, Texas is up next with what are the specifics of embedding WLM meters in Zoom like Hasmuk is doing?
Does anyone take a crack at that? It's I don't know where it's going into. Is it going? I think it's just going into audio hijack with and using the WLM as a plugin. Go ahead, Chris.
Yeah, you have to have something to host the plugin. So I think you can do it in hijack. But in terms of getting it into the meeting, what I like to do when I have one app that I need to stream from, I'll set it up on another computer. Again, back to OBS. OBS can do a window share. Okay, it doesn't have to do a whole full screen scrape. You can do a window share. So, for example, I can run Keynote over in a corner of the screen, and then in OBS, I select that window as my source that I want to share. About a year ago, when I started playing with OBS, they made a huge upgrade where they actually just have now a checkbox. I can very easily turn on and off the virtual camera. It used to be a whole bunch of other nightmare voodoo, but now you just turn on the virtual camera, and then that window through OBS goes into your Zoom, and just select your OBS virtual camera as your input to Zoom. And it's really nice because you can pick a source, send it out, but still be able to like work on that computer. I also use it for like stage timers and things like that. It's a really simple way to set things up, and you're not asking OBS to do a whole lot. And that's where everybody, I've learned so much, Alex, when you made the point about the problem with virtual switchers is you don't know when you've run out of physical buttons. So we just asked them to do too much, and that's when they crash.
Yeah, absolutely.
So it's a very simple thing to share a window.
Next question.
Alton Christensen in New York City says, is there a good place to find a catalog of UDZ models?
Yeah, there's one called USDZ Share, which is .com, which is a good one. You can also find some USD models in TurboSquid, Sketchfab, CG Trader. They all have some. But USDZ Share is probably the most prominent one of the bunch. Remember that you can convert any OBJ to a USDZ using Reality Converter. You have to be a Apple developer to get it, but it's pretty effective at making that change. And then the ultimate way to move into USDZ is to bring it into Adobe Substance. Is really the best easy way to do it. There's Houdini and a bunch of other things that'll do it, but Adobe Substance it takes a little bit of getting used to, but it's super powerful, and it's a very powerful USDZ exporter. Next question.
Claude Miguel Lopez Waterman in Salisbury, Maryland. Next with, has anyone taken a look at the recent ETC EOS Apex launch event? I thought some of their pre-recorded and pre-edited content was quite well done, along the lines that we built this while we were home for the pandemic.
I haven't seen it. I would love to take a look at it, though. If you think it's good, Tlaloc, I will review it. Please Discord me the link. I'll take a look at it. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael up next with, Alex, you mentioned building custom show interfaces and custom USDZ models as two growth areas in our industry. What other areas do you predict?
I think we're going to move. All I'll say is I think we're going to move away from these big events and more towards ongoing connections with our customers. Just weekly, monthly, daily. The kind of thing that we're doing is going to be is over time going to take over the idea. The reason that we do these things in 3-day windows and 1-day windows and everything else is because we didn't have Zoom. Like we didn't have broadcast. We didn't have, but we held on to it. We've held on to those old fashioned ways, and the pandemic put a big shift in that. What's happening in Eastern Europe may put another big spike into that as well. So we just, it depends on where it goes. So there's a lot of, potentially really bad things. So building physical events is, building a house on sand right now. So I think that that's going to be the challenge for everybody. That's a much more stable way to go, is to ongoing, consistent, responsive connection with people's consumers. Next question.
Brent Kruger in Minneapolis, Minnesota said, if you had to spend your last $8,000 on a maxed out Studio Ultra, how would you use it to get your money back the fastest?
Good, Courtney.
I would buy one off of a movie set that has a product placement deal with Apple and get the cast to sign it, and I'd put it up as an NFT.
That's great. Go ahead, George.
That's a tough question. We always say in office hours here, have a project, have multiple projects to pay for that. It's kind of a tough. It's not like a camera where you're going to take it out every day. So it's kind of tough to say how you're going to make back that 8,000 unless you have some way of renting it out every time you do a project. That's the only way you're going to make it back.
Good, Chris.
Business mistake number one is to get an idea and then say, okay, if to provide this service, I just got to buy this camera, this computer, these lights, this thing, these chairs, and then hang a shingle. It's the hang a shingle is the mistake, and then just sit there and wait for the work. No, the first thing you do is you go out and you get the work, and then you beg, borrow, rent, finagle the equipment until the process of getting the equipment is so difficult that you actually have to go out and buy it. I knew a guy years ago, he advertised himself on the Real Directory as a camera operator. Okay. He didn't own a camera, but what he did do is he found all the guys that would rent themselves and a camera so cheap, they had no skill, so cheap that he could hire them as a shooter. And when they'd show up at the site, he'd say, oh, by the way, I'm running the camera. You're my audio guy. Oh, and I'm putting my sticker over your sticker. And he did this for long enough until he built up his clientele to the point where he actually had to buy his own camera.
Yeah. And many of us have, we rent, and then we buy. Or if I get enough jobs that are coming up, I do make calculations of, I got this much, I got 2 months or 3 months of work. I know that I can pay it off, but I would never buy anything that I didn't have money, I didn't have demand for already.
Right. I think a lot of times what we do is we use business as an excuse to satisfy our tech urges.
Yeah.
Like, I totally need this for business. Nah, maybe.
Yeah. Next question.
Eduardo Augustine in Panama says, instead of a Decklink, what about a CamLink Pro for 4 outputs from Zoom?
Go ahead, Jason.
I believe it only does inputs, and also I love Elgato, but never in a million years would I do that. It's not stable, it's not designed for it, and it's PC only.
Yeah, and I think it's inputs, not outputs. Next question.
I think George Butters is teasing us from Halifax. Where can you get one of the giant 5-foot square laptops and iPads on display next to tiny humans during the Apple launch yesterday?
I saw that. It was like there was a weird shot where they had them behind them, and it just looked like they were like tiny people or really, really large iPads. It was a funny shot that I'm surprised they didn't see in post. Like while they were working on it, I felt like they should have seen that looks super weird. Anyway, they did. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael's up next. Would there be any sort of management agency or similar organization for helping media professionals with disabilities develop their careers in the industry?
I think that there are, but I know that we've worked with some of them, but I just can't think of who they are. So I'll have to think through that a little bit. Yeah. All right. And before we get started, Bill, I need to bail at 8:30. You can keep it running. Okay.
Absolutely.
Keep the fires going.
Yeah.
Great. So we're changing subjects, and what we're talking about today are Supersource backgrounds. We always talk about we've talked about Supersources in the past. We've not talked about the backgrounds, and it turns out that we're struggling with our background. We're trying to figure out. We know that the one that I asked for didn't really work, but I think that we're gonna play with ideas, and so I thought it'd be useful for us to kind of look at what other people are doing in this area. And so I thought I'll show a couple of them. We'll spend a couple minutes looking at them, and then we'll open it up to your comments and questions around the Supersources. So let's let me see if I can get this working here. So here is Squawk Box. I think Squawk Box or Market Alert or something like that. And so here is, let me make sure I'm clicked on this. And let's see here if I go. so here we can see, one thing that we want to notice is how slow everything moves. The idea is generally not to, sorry. Did I not do that?
Yeah, you're not sharing, I don't think.
There we go. There's Squawk Box, or whatever it is. And here what we want to see is, number one is we will see a lot of them that are fairly cool in color. I think that in general, the blues, greens, those types of things work better than a lot of the other colors. We will see some other ones that are bright and yellow and that. And we'll have to decide whether we like them or not. But here you can see just some basic 3D elements. And again, the thing to look at really is how slow they go. They're not. It's not a particularly fast thing. They kind of have to drift. They don't want to, with any of these, you don't want to draw the eye too much to them. They're really there to be a background, not a foreground. So that's one of the things we want to kind of think through as we look at those kinds of things. There's another one with some basic. I know how to rotate. I can build this really quickly if I do a rotate. I don't think it's the nicest design I've ever seen, but it works okay. And for now, I mean, while I'm talking, the panelists can just throw ideas in.
That one's too bright for me.
Yeah, it's too bright for me too.
Well, you mentioned specific colors, and I'm realizing that the psychology of colors, there's a history there with green room is because it was a passive calming effect on something, but that we as humans have an RGB or in our cones. I'm not a scientist. I mean, I'm not a doctor, but that basis of base colors.
I think it mostly is that the cooler colors are more complementary to the skin tones. Like it doesn't compete with it. I think that's
and you look at any, again, movie poster, you'll see that very common thread.
Yeah. So this is
going back to that Kramer one. The thing that strikes me is that their audience understands exactly where each of those numbers are going to show up. Because
remember, we're only talking about the background. Only backgrounds.
Background.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, we're only talking about the
background.
Yeah. So that's what we're trying to solve right now for ourselves, and then we're looking at this one. I kind of like this one. I think that I realized when I saw this, it could theoretically work for us, but would have to have a little bit more moving in the dots.
The dots are so subtle it almost looks just like a blue to black switcher wipe.
But I think that if you did kind of like a wave of the dots lighting up going across very slowly, it could be kind of cool. You could with little bright pins that shimmered across it. I think that could be a kind of a cool effect by itself. I think I agree with you. It's a little bland. This is the BBC. I find this one, there is kind of, you can't really see it. There's kind of some soft elements that are floating behind it, but it's really, I feel like it's very bland.
Well, again, movement creates energy. And I remember my first
producer, just that there's not enough movement and enough contrast to even see it. So 90% of the time it's up, you don't see it.
My producer originally browbeat me into, okay, take whatever movement you're doing as a background and reduce it by 80%, and then reduce that by 80%.
Right.
And so that was his styling.
This is barely moving with no contrast.
It looks like white to me.
I know it, and most of the time it does. Here's your classic Earth background here in purple. Ours turned purple. I don't know how ours became purple instead of blue, but it was purple. But I don't think the purple.
And then with regards to the movement, the fight or flight concept of we're going to be drawn to whatever is moving. So that's, I guess, the pace of a thing.
Again, yeah. I mean, I think that, slow. I think we've established slow is the way to go. I find this one to be a little too blurry. It's a little, like it's got this like out of, it definitely feels like one of those. I mean, this one feels very much like a motion template that got blurred a lot.
Well, from the wide angle of a concept, do you want to perceive where you are, or do you just want color?
No, I don't think that it's bad. I just think that it just feels too blurry, to me. Like it just.
What it reminds me of, Alex, is those times when they have a vertical video and they just really blur it and put it behind on both sides.
Yeah. So I don't. And again, if you're watching this and have comments, you can throw them in there.
Well, the homage to that would be the newsreader room.
Yeah. It is. But again, less blurry than this though. Like it is. I mean, those backgrounds are less blurry. I just feel like it's not enough. There's not any detail there.
I think one of the first questions you ask about the background is, do you want it to be, and my preference is yes, do you want it to say something about a theme or what we are doing, or is it just some geometric thing?
And we'll see. I think we'll see an example a little later of that, where they took more of that entrance.
I actually like this blurry one, except for the big patch of blue underneath the three heads. This is
one of my favorites. You know, with the NFL or with Friday Night Football, like those are, when you watch them, they're actually pretty complex. There are these like 3D things that are kind of interacting with each other back there. They're still blurry. You know,
it looked like I saw the texture of a football up above.
It's not a football, I don't think, but it's like, it's got like it does have a texture. So there are these bars that are moving in and out among each other. And then on them, there's this fine little texture that you see in other parts of their design. It's almost like a riveting, not a rivet, but like a steel plate kind of texture to it. And then it's out of focus. And then it's lit with soft light. And there, I think that it's brighter than I would normally go, but I think that overall, I think it's a pretty complex design that doesn't get in the way. I think
and you'll really see the difference in the branding of the different networks too, because the garishness of Fox versus the subtlety of CBS versus the newsy of NBC
versus the money of Friday Night Football.
Yeah.
I think we've looked at this, not Friday night, but Sunday Night Football. Like Sunday Night Football.
Is so good.
So much money. It's so good.
Diamond plate is the word you were
Diamond plate. That's what I was looking for. Yeah, exactly. Not quite diamond plate, but a little bit. This one makes me a little, like it's coming at you.
It's scary.
And, it kind of makes me feel very uncomfortable. Maybe that's the point.
It's the news. They want you to feel uncomfortable.
Yeah. They do a good job on that one. Really bright.
It's a morning show.
Yeah.
See? It's thematic. Yeah. It's a morning show.
Yeah. Hello.
When I worked at Disney, they actually had times of day that had different colors associated with it, because they knew their audience at 8 a.m. was small, tiny children. At 10 a.m. was a different audience of demographic. And then, of course, 3 p.m. was the middle school kids. By evening, it was a much different color pattern.
Yeah.
So doesn't this Alex, I guess it's a little distracting for me, because I mean, there's two people there, but still the background it's pulling away from the two speakers.
And it's almost too sharp. Like it's too sharp now. Like it's like there's too much detail there that you're seeing. I think it
also
more
doesn't
out of
help.
focus.
It also doesn't help that both people are in relatively dark frames. So the
Which
woman
they
on the
normally
right,
are.
yeah,
right, yeah, and it is and they have black edging, which is very odd.
It's weird to me that she's obviously in a studio setup, but the woman on the right has very little hair detail or backlight. You would have suspected that they could have flown something to make her stand out from that.
It's harder because I think
background.
she's in a location, and I bet you it was a little bit. There is a hot hair light on her. It's just that I think it was probably hard to position, but there's definitely hair light on her, just not enough.
The LD was in a bad mood that day.
She's in a green screen on the right.
I don't think so.
No.
And so for me, the background
really
being
underlit for a
that
green
bright
screen,
and that white is really making it hard for me to focus on her.
Right. Yeah. No, absolutely. It's a really bad background and a bad composite. A bad like framing. If it was green screen, like if that's green screen, they did a really bad job.
Which is one of the biggest problems of background in general, because your content can be shifting above it, so it can work 1 minute and then suddenly it can fail to work.
Yeah, I kind of like this one.
It's
I don't like
interesting.
the frame above it, but the blues just kind of moving along and kind of, oops. There we go.
At a certain level, some of the graphic elements do sort of become background noise.
Mm-hmm.
I totally understand we're looking at the background.
We just have enough background on some of ours with our super sources. We have to think about what it's going to look like.
Right. That negative space, sure.
And the word Supersource, is that not specific to Blackmagic? Because I never heard it.
It's Blackmagic. It's usually product. Otherwise it's 2 up, 3 up, 4 up. But just so many of us use. It's easier to say Supersource than it is 3 up, and when you're talking to someone about it, because like 90% of people I know use the Blackmagic.
But
I wonder if there's a pace that could be measured where a moving background changed to a drifting background. I wonder if there's a psychological break there.
I don't know.
Where X number of pixels per second over this distance makes it a drift rather than a move, and
Right.
makes it easier to not conflict with the primary content.
It would be interesting to measure the pixels per frame
per
that it
pixel per frame,
moves,
yeah.
and come up with a quantified description. Like,
Yeah.
Alex Lindsay likes 15 pixels per second or whatever.
Yeah,
it is.
yeah, that's interesting. Yeah. Here's another one that's moving ever so slowly. It's like 3D, like little 3D sheets. You can see it here too. Just like little, and I like that kind of like that slow interaction. This is basically an interaction of the 3D model with a plane. Like they're just kind of rotating the 3D model into a plane. That's all it is. It's kind of cool.
But it's
It was
the
interesting
logo.
too that
It's
the
the logo.
gradient. The gradient allowed it to show through in a box form, and then that gradient drifts off into a solid before it gets to the picture. That's an interesting way to incorporate the background more into the foreground.
Mm-hmm.
So thinking of that, Alex, in terms of a theme, maybe the thing to look at is taking the office hours gear and making that be the texture, shape, the motivation behind what we're seeing. Is it the gear spinning? Is it the gear building? Is it?
And
Also, in this case, those rays bring you down to the logo, which is branding.
And
so
and there's-
visually, that's where the weight is going.
The keyword that Chris just mentioned, the motivation, and we don't sometimes know why we like something. We just know we likes it, as the quote goes. So consequently, okay, there's my one quote for the day.
Look at that little specular highlight they've also put on.
motivation.
Yeah, I was going to say, is that lens flare bug you, Alex?
Yes. Yeah, it does. It's just silly.
But it really makes that edge stand out, so you know where the logo begins.
Yeah, but
I mean,
it's like flickering like a little North Star, or something, like a little star. Not
But even if it wasn't flickering, if it was static, is that the kind of like faux lens flare that bugs you so much?
It's I don't think it's necessary.
And would they have designed it in full screen and then it was used as a smaller edge of a corner? So
I wish that NBC logo was actually just cut out and not in a blue thing. But again, we're talking about the backgrounds, people.
Yeah, but
that's how it works with the background.
But I think that the background, I do like the idea of some kind of logo or elements being kind of embedded into a plane like that. I thought that was it's kind of cool. It's kind of cool.
But in this case, the element is the NBC Peacock.
In this case, it doesn't have to be though. It could be,
I think it should always be the NBC Peacock, regardless of the network.
Understood.
No, but my point being is we could do something with the gear. So again, it's not just some random digital noise. It's thematic and planned.
Yeah. No, I think we could. The gear, having the 2D logo like just coming in and like rotating in and out of a plane could be interesting.
Right. Also, another subtle story we might want to put into the background is the fact that it is a global show. It is a global conversation where no one is left out. So possibly the globe should be a part of it, as opposed to just random lines traveling through space. Again, even the background can tell a little bit of the story.
Yeah.
Well, the background is the stage that everything is standing on top of.
Right. Yeah, and I don't like that one that much. I don't like this one that much. They're just too bright.
There was a lot of
going on.
Also the glint. Go back one. You'll notice where they put the glint and what they want you to. Yeah, the breaking news is the flare that they put across the breaking news. Again,
that's already so busy. My eyes have so many places to go in that frame.
But watch it, and you'll notice it because.
Yeah, but we're not looking at the foreground. We're looking at the background. This one's kind of, again, I like this one kind of subtle. It is kind of a globe in the background. That might be kind of a good guide towards, something subtle of a globe in the background with, I kind of like that idea.
Well, and it's
that one is
double globe.
So busy.
This scares me.
This one's like so upsetting.
Again,
I was like, what?
That's Fox. Fox is very.
Oh no, some of the other ones. There's other ones on Fox that are fine. It's just that designer. We went through some of the other ones, and they were Fox shows. It's not Fox. It's just that show. I think this is Fox and Friends or whatever.
Also, a morning show
really hurts.
There's that problem of drifting versus moving. That's moving. That ain't drifting at all.
Yeah. Yeah. No, absolutely.
Yeah, Alex, that's your homework for the day. I want you to define pixels per frame or pixels per second motion for drifting versus movement.
I think that looking at it and talking to it, I like your idea of the globe, but I still like my little pins. And there's part of me that wants to do something where it's blue background with a globe, but with those little pins, and then have a highlight that goes across just the pins. Just kind of goes like a. I think that could be really nice.
I'm really, when it comes to designing anything, I always need that foundation or stage to build upon. So it needs. It's not just it's cool, but it tells this portion of the story.
I wonder if we could take the thing that has all the lights, all the cities that are, if we could figure out a way to go and get all the cities that members are from in Discord, like
Pretto has all that data.
But I'm saying we could gather all that of all the cities that are there, and then we have little pinpricks across all the cities, and then that light thing goes across those, and you just see these
Or put all the pins for all the members in and just light up the ones who are in the panel or something.
And just make sure your globe,
you won't. Too much will be covered. You won't see that.
Just make sure your globe is spinning the correct direction.
Alex, have you ever heard of
before? Be flat.
Oh, Alex, have you ever heard of a plugin called Yanobox Nodes?
No.
Oh yeah.
Take a look at it.
Stuff's great.
Oh yeah.
It's super cool, and there's map nodes, and you can get a lot of motion and texture and geometry very inexpensively, and then treat it and subtleize it. And
I'll take a look at it.
You will really. I apologize in advance for the time that I have sucked away from your day, because once you download this, you're going to get.
That's definitely a world to explore.
Is it a plugin or is it its own app?
No, it's a plugin for Final Cut.
Okay, great.
You'll love it.
I think I might actually have it. Just haven't looked at it for a while. People send me lots of things. Anyway, let's go to the next question.
The first question in the group of this talk is Supersource backgrounds. TJ Asher, Minneapolis, Minnesota. Watching the show yesterday, and when there were views of hardware, because the AV hardware is almost all black, the hardware was hard to see against the darker background. What's a good background that works with most graphics?
I think that we have to figure out the way we display those things. I think that I think our current background doesn't work, for those backgrounds. And we just have to figure out, how we separate those. And one thing you'll notice is a lot of times when people use graphics, they don't put it over the background. So the Supersource background is its own background that works for the Supersources. And then if you look at if you're watching nightly news or whatever, they have a background that's designed for the products, and we have to kind of think through that process. Go ahead, Chris.
7. I think just 7. No,
42.
You have to look at the problem with anything is contrast, and the contrast is going to be different all the time. So that's why drop shadows were invented. That's why glows were invented. If you have a white word with a black drop shadow, you can put it over anything.
Well, and I think that if we do bring the values up a little bit for the device background, I think that it'll jump out better. Like something in the middle tends to work better for both directions. Go ahead, Sky, real quick.
And from a color point, have your opposite color available in the same pattern. That way you've got a daylight and a nighttime version.
I don't think we need to do that. I think that we just need I think we need to bring it up, the values up for, again, the product shots, which the product shots do not have to be the same background that we're using for the Supersource. In fact, I'll argue that they should not be. They should be a design thing that's designed to display a product.
If you've got the resources and the ability and the time to do that, sure.
Well, there's only one. I mean, you build the background and then you drop things over top of it. The background just has to be closer to neutral than it is now. Go ahead, Bill.
I was so surprised yesterday when we were doing the live Apple thing, because I was watching it on my iPad, and the contrast range was so much different on that feed than it was on the normal monitor feeds for me. I'm sure that has to do partially with the fact that these are relatively inexpensive monitors I'm using for this feed. But I would imagine that would make it harder to pick these values and to be consistent with they'll work across the range of monitors that people have.
If the backgrounds are more closer to the middle of the exposure, both directions will contrast better. Right now, we're just too dark. Next question.
So mid-gray, maybe.
Not gray. It's not the color. It's the value. The value has to be higher. Next question.
Chris Widener, Lafayette, Indiana, says, on video Supersource backgrounds, the motion seems distracting at times. Would the geometry of the background play into that as much as the speed?
Go ahead, Chris.
yeah, anything can play into it. I think what you're dealing with is it more interesting than the content? if your content's so bad that your background is more interesting and you're distracting squirrel, like, you know, because it's interesting, then you have a problem. And so it needs to be, it's a sweet spot. And that's why I'm so interested, I'll go back to it 100 times, the quantifying. What is the speed that something can move? What is the color value? I think a year ago I mentioned that there's actually a website that you can point your website to, and it will analyze it and tell you where you are endangered of being sued for accessibility issues in terms of the contrast of colors. Right. And so these things can be quantified, and I'm fascinated with what it takes. Like even the last question about what color, what value should the background be? It doesn't matter. You pick a value, somebody's going to have a product that's going to get lost in that value.
Right. Yeah. Go ahead, John.
I was watching the ones on Tucker Carlson the other night, and they're boxes and lines, and then they grow and they shrink and they move. They're way more interesting than what he's talking about.
Yeah. Go ahead, Bill.
One of the things that drives me nuts is when somebody takes a canned graphic background and uses it, and it has any kind of text, because I'm always trying to parse out what that text could mean. Sometimes it's a line that's blown up so big and I get 3 letters, and I find that always pulling me out of the content I'm watching as I'm trying to figure out what it's saying maybe.
Yeah, go ahead, Sky.
Oh, we're moving on to the next question.
I'm sorry. Next question. Sorry.
Okay.
Sorry, I was dealing with too many things.
Yep.
In Austin, Texas, says MSNBC, Fox, CNN, ABC, NBC, CBS, PBS. Who has the best super sources?
I think, Paul, once you decide who's got the best barbecue in Austin, that will be your answer, because it's subjective. And they also rotate these, and they're seasonal. So every year we would come up with a new color.
You have to answer. You just have to call it out. You have to answer it. You have to call one out.
NBC.
Go ahead, George. Just answer that question.
CNN.
What's the best one? CNN. Bill.
That's the right question.
I've been watching ABC a little bit more lately, and I've kind of enjoyed theirs. I think it's too bright sometimes, but that's kind of where I'm heading.
CNN, in my opinion, of all of them, or NBC.
BBC.
No. They do a lot of great graphics, and they don't do good super sources. Next question.
Next one comes to us from Douglas Carmichael. Could Apple Motion be used to build ambient backgrounds that loop seamlessly?
Yeah, that's one of the great things about the replicator is that you can actually set it. You just set it. It's going to be this long, and it will perfectly be looped all the time. So you set it up to that. As long as you have an even increment through it, whatever you're doing in the background will loop perfectly when you cut it. It's why I build all of my super sources. When I build super sources, they're all built in Motion, because I can do that loop, and I don't have to do any kind of math. It just does it for me. Next question.
Next one comes to us from Alex 40 Goldner in London in the UK. He says, what office hours metaphor or metaphors could a Supersource background illustrate? Connecting, community, answers, technology, regularity, 24 hours a day, consistency.
What I think is we're coming towards is this whole between what Chris said and looking at some of the backgrounds. I really like the idea of a globe with the cities where everybody's from, glimmering here and there, like just kind of it doesn't have to be reactive of who's there or anything else, but just kind of maybe even some little connections, like really subtle moving very slowly between some of the groups and everything else. I think there's something there. I think that this conversation has been very useful because I think we've sussed out something looking at it and thinking about it. Next question.
Next one comes from Alex Goldner once again. He says, considerations for streaming, HDR, different resolutions, for example, recognition when in a video thumbnail.
The video thumbnail I'm not too worried about. We do have to think about HDR, which means that everything does have to keep moving, and we have to be careful of how bright we make it. What I do want to do, though, is the problem with the current one we have is it doesn't have any contrast, in the sense that that's why the little pin pricks and stuff would be cool, is we want to take full advantage of the HDR, but we don't want to burn anything out. So things have to be kind of moving, constantly. So we're changing pixels and so on and so forth, and moving them around and changing those values. Next question.
Alex Goldner back once again with no-nos, lens flares, too bright, moving shadows. What else?
Go ahead, Sky.
I'm just going to say the quantity of each of those is the the question,
I would say lens flares is a no-no all the time.
Well, that's a Michael. Well, you were abused by Michael Bays in one of their
No. I'm not talking about like I'm just saying that if you're not going to do like a really accurate one,
there we go.
That means something.
There's the quantitative.
No one ever does that.
They use too much of it. That's my point. Too much salt is going to ruin it.
I once spent 3 days working on just the lens flare off of a ship.
Yeah.
Like just so it's
most people don't care.
I know.
You are absolutely the lunatic fringe when it comes to this. The lunatic fringe. You have to let go of that, or you're not going to be a happy human.
First day I got to ILM, I had gone through doing. This is my last thing, and I got to go. I had gotten to ILM, and we've been doing 25 shots a week, for Lucasfilm, just previs, and everything's moving really fast. And I was just used to this fast pace. Like it's a new shot. Like you're constantly, all you're doing is revising shots and putting out new shots. I get there, and for the whole day, or the whole morning my first day at ILM was Stu Mashowitz and John Knoll looking at. John had taken a pin light and just gone back and forth in front of a camera, a pan of it, like they filmed it, and they filmed the whole thing, and they're just watching how the flares interact with the lens, going, see that, yeah. What about that? You see how that did that thing? Yeah. It was like that for 3 hours, and I was like
lunatic fringe.
I was like, and I thought to myself, I'm really going to be able to let my OCD free here. So, anyway, all right, I got to go. I got to jump into a meeting. Bill, take it away. Thanks,
Thank you, Alex. So I had a next comment, and it was just this.
I'm going to say one last thing. 9:00 on the dot. I will jump.
Build the feed.
Yeah.
Got it. Thank you. The moving shadows, when it comes to that little graphic that Alex had up earlier that had the dimensionality to it, the kind of looked like the crown of Statue of Liberty. I was interested because the shadows were subtly changing the depth perception of that thing. It looked like it was extruding out and back. Now, I know that's not exactly the same as the light source is moving and everything in the scene is casting shadows, but I actually thought that was positive rather than negative. So I guess in all the cases, whatever we say is a no-no in context of it didn't work to increase the communication and help this idea's job, which is to be a background, to subsume itself so that you're not watching it instead of the thing, but still provide a base upon which we can wash. We only have about 4 more questions after here, so I'm just going to note to our producers that it's going to be a very short show, and we'll have to just talk about our pets if we don't get a few more questions in here. Thanks. And yeah, I see a lot of thumbs up for that. And I can hold my own on that. Charlie, I'll get Charlie in here. In any case, we're moving on to the next question, which is Kyle Hammond in Chicago. And Kyle says, would you ever use real-world images for a background or stick to abstract? And looks like Sky's up first and then George Kennedy. So Sky, go ahead.
Again, what Bill just said about what is moving the story forward. So yes, I would absolutely use a background of a real element because you're there to support. It's the stage by which you're putting your character in front of. So consequently, is it distracting is the real question. If you're constantly staring at that small child in the back, playing with the dog, which again, kids and puppies will always supersede anything. That means you may want to blur that or use a different part of the shot. But understand that your whole image, all 1920, 1080 or 4K of pixels is telling a part of the story. So think of it like stage.
And George Kennedy.
It's always tricky for me to use images as a background and then layer, pips on top of it. So I try to stay abstract and not, unless it really is going to drive the story. Or a lot of times we use images in backgrounds for video walls, but for Supersource, I try to stay away from it.
I had a technique that I used to use back when I was doing a lot of shooting in stores, particularly retail stores. And I would take my camera, I would zoom out to a relatively long lens things, and then I would do swish pans. And for those of you who are not familiar with the term, it's basically taking the camera's pan bar and moving it forcefully to one side. The camera would zoom across something really fast. And if you take that shot and then slow it down, what you get is kind of a stretched out, can't really see things. But the reason I did it in the store was that the store usually had a color pattern. And even if I was on their corporate brands, that had a color pattern. And so those swish pans became a a slightly thing that said the store, but you couldn't see it, and I would use that as my background behind windows of shots. It used to work very effectively, and people would go, "Wow, that's really a cool thing. Did you buy that somewhere?" No, we just made it in the field when we were out there. So I do think there's possibilities of creating through some regular techniques, some in-camera techniques, some nice backgrounds that can work, and they're incredibly cheap because you don't have to pay anything for them. Go ahead, Sky. You had another thought?
Well, you brought up the point of swish pants. That is, again, back to my point of Paul and the style of a thing that will constantly change. Swish pans used to be an abomination in camera work. Jiggle cam used to be an abomination in camera work. So consequently, to take these anomalies and turn them into an artistic experience that, again, as George says, moves the story forward, and use them. Movement is energy. So where do you need some energy? At what point in your story do you need to rise and fall? And George, to your point, I'm sure you've had corporations that have their logo back behind. Now, the step and repeat is that's been abused. That's been abused, and it's cliche. But again, it's so that wherever that camera person in the paparazzi is going to get the logo of the sponsor that's paying for that event. So there's, always a reason for something. But to your point, George, is the background, or I know it's called a Supersource in Black Magic world, going to be the stage by which you're supporting your story.
And step and repeats drove me nuts only because they would only have 6 of them, and they would be in front. The character in front would be obscuring them all, so you couldn't really tell what they were trying to brand. As long as one of the step and repeats was clear, and I could
define what a step and repeat is, and where
you see that often in sports interviews and things like that, where they'll take the team logo or some little thing, and they will put it in the background. Click here, 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 and here, and then the next line it's a little offset, and it's here and here, and so it's the same logo repeated on a background behind some sort of thing. Usually, it brands an institution or something like that. So you'll see a college name or something like that when it's their sports team, that kind of thing. All right, let's move on to the next question. This is from Jeremy White in Virginia, and he says, what about skeuomorphism, using parts of physical set pieces to digitally frame the boxes? And for those of you who might not be familiar with the term skeuomorphic, it really means doing a digital version of something that you would normally expect in the real world. The classic example of that was, for a long time, the Apple address book looked like an address book. It had a little cover, and it had lines and fake rings in the ring binder. That's a very good example of skeuomorphism. It's trying to make something look so familiar that the user understands how to use it because it apes something in the real world. Sky, go ahead.
And again, initially, you will do something that's iconic for your audience that they recognize. And then eventually you will progress into just a corner of it, or just a percentage of it. And that way it's becoming an art piece of itself.
Absolutely. Okay, moving on. Kyle Hammond comes up next. And Kyle says, for a show, would you build your background and timer with the same or similar assets, or better to have them be a stark difference? Build your background and George, go ahead.
So I try to keep it as a theme, and you'll see in the office hours timer also, or the clock, you'll see that same theme in the timer, if that's what you were asking. Same thing for the clock, but I would build straight across the theme. And it depends on the client too. But if you work with a client that want to stick with a theme, generally you'll do it across the board.
Yeah, this causes me to think of the word variations. And, I've been working for a long time with style books from corporations, and you will see that they work very, very hard to have a consistent style, but to allow variation within that. So they will say certain things have to be in a certain place. They have to be they can be reversed out of something, so they might be dark or light, but they have a standard for both of those things, so that the dark is always done one way and the light is always done one way. When the logo is used, it has to be in one of these 3 positions. It can't be anywhere else on the screen. Particularly in print, those things create assets that look like your brand. So when we get here to Supersources, what we're talking about now, whatever you create in terms of the background for your Supersource, if you stick with it, if you make it flexible, and this may be why we're spending so much time trying to figure it out up front, if you make it something that works in a lot of circumstances, you can use it consistently, and then when people pop into your channel, they immediately go, oh, that's office hours. It can't be anything else because I've seen these elements. Even if I'm on a different, even if I'm in a question as opposed to in the main panel, it still looks like office hours. And that's what these style guides tend to help people do. Go ahead, Sky.
Well, and again, I've worked with style guides. They're the Bible, and you do not go outside of those boundaries, because the corporation is branding physically the colors, the shapes into their audiences so that you've got immediate recognition. There's also trust. So the clientele, the customer, the corporation is trying to build trust with you, their customer, that once you see that, you will buy it because you trust it. So that's where these style guides are the Bible.
They even assign a monetary value on their books to brand. And, something like McDonald's, a family traveling across a highway sees that McDonald's arch, and their expectation of a certain experience will be set simply from the logo. And they may feel that it's safe to go in there, it's inexpensive for the kids or whatever it is, whatever their perception of the brand is, or they may, I don't like that. That's not my brand of food or whatever. But it's very powerful, and that's why I think it becomes such a big deal that it's even affecting their brand value. George, go ahead. You had another comment?
Yeah, to expand on that a little bit also, you might sometimes at a conference, you might have more than one company presenting, but like you were saying, there is a style guide for that particular conference. But each company can use their individual colors, but the style and design of the graphics have to be this. Well, the backgrounds and so forth have to be the same, but you could change the color, but not the aesthetics and design of the actual background.
Absolutely. And one of the most difficult chores I used to have is that I would get a style guide that had been in place for 10 or 15 years for a company, but it was all about print. And now you're saying, I need to use this in video, and I need to figure out how to use your logo in a lower third stripe to identify somebody. And you're going, that logo looked great on your annual report, but it's terrible for what I'm trying to do with it. And you'd have to spend a lot of time getting permission to change anything about that element from the style guide. Go ahead, Sky.
Yes, and many of the new style guides that I've seen, and I guess I'll quickly define a style guide, are somebody spent a lot of money paying somebody to get very specific about a color, a hashtag, a font, a logo, and they've spent a lot of money on that to, again, imprint on their audience's mind their product, their brand. So
and now what we're talking about is that we are charged with doing backgrounds that are going to go behind other content. And by itself, that process, putting something on top of something, if you were to incorporate branding elements outside of colors and things like that into a background and then mess with it by the super sources that go on top of that, you could find yourself with a lot of conversations with a company. Now, we're doing something for office hours, so Alex has control over that. But it's just something to understand in talking about backgrounds, that sometimes your background has to accept the reality of corporate logos and corporate branding if you want to get signed off on your work. Let's go to Rob Collins. He's next here. The next question. Oops, it's not popping, so I'm going to go ahead and do it. Rob Collins says, why is it called a Supersource and something like motion backgrounds? Where did the name Supersource comes from? Let's start with Sky.
Yes, I have always heard them be referred to as background as well, and I've used them from story blocks and the video backgrounds that you purchase, and you can modify and change in After Effects and in some of these different platforms. I was introduced to the term Supersource by Alex because he works within the Black Magic world, and I'm being told, yes, that was Black Magic is the one that twisted that name into what's he's referred to as Supersource, but I historically referred to them as backgrounds.
And George.
So Black Magic, well, obviously in the live event world, it's taking multiple feeds from different places. It could be cameras, it could be satellite sources. So taking multiple layers and layering it on top of a background, and that's where you get the boxes. Obviously, Blackmagic has got it's Supersource, they call them. Well, Supersources, it supersedes the background. And in regular AV or Grass Valley might just call them pips. So just individual pip boxes on screen. So it's just Blackmagic's take on pips. It's called it Supersources. It just supersedes the bottom layer.
Absolutely. And PIP, I remember as picture in picture. So that was kind of like the first dumb switchers would be able to give you a box and then on top of another box. And that was like, wow, for back then. We used to pay a lot of money for ADOs, Ampex Digital optical boxes, to be able to do those in the old days of TV. But yeah. And so it kind of makes sense to me. I mean, you've got three sources on screen and a 3-up. And then all of a sudden you're trying to use that 3-up as an element in something else. So Supersource always kind of clicked for me. I thought it was actually a pretty good explanation. Let's move on to the next question here. This comes from Alex 4D Goldner in London, and he says, how long should the loop be? So presuming that you're going to be looking at a motion background, what are some of the metrics for this, George?
This is a tough question. I just it was a live event, but it was a 3-hour long event. So we decided, you know what, we're going to make the loop 3.5 hours, literally, because we made the loop 3.5 hours because we didn't want to mistake this, playback and somebody take off the loop and suddenly you have a 5-minute piece that's supposed to be looping for 3 hours just stops. So it depends, as Mickey would say.
Absolutely. Sky, and I'm laughing because I'll tell you the story after we get Sky's comments.
Well, again, the loops that I've made are the product itself. The background was, again, maybe 3 minutes because the event you didn't know when it was going to be seen. And then I would literally split it in the middle and then do a huge cross dissolve and repurpose it so that it was never seen as a jerk of it's back to the front. You always want to just try to have a smooth transition, always doing the same thing, but not distracting from whatever's in the foreground. So how long do you it depends on where it's going to be seen. If it's going to be a 60-second thing, you wouldn't have a loop. But if you're doing it just as a generic, it's always going to be going, I don't know, make it a minute, but then do some kind of a slice and then dissolve the head and the tail together so that when it does come back again, you never see the edit point.
Yeah, and I'm going to support what you both have said. In the short ones, you want to try to get a seamless transition so that there's not a jerk. There's nothing that looks worse than you're watching the regular content up front and suddenly the background just goes, and it's a jump cut, essentially. To George's point, I had to do one of those once upon a time. We were having a big conference in the snow country. It was up in Colorado, and the whole place was just snowed in totally. So I had this brilliant idea, and then I had to execute it, of when the conference starts, we're going to be seeing a snowy field outside, but I wanted over the course of time snow to build up in my windows of my background. So I had to do a 3.5 hour loop as well and add snow at various intervals and dissolve it on quietly into the corners of the windows. So at the end of the long conference, all those backgrounds looked snowier than they had, and it was a ridiculous amount of work, and I will never do that again. So Douglas Carmichael has our next question. Let's move on. How do you designate the boxes in a Supersource background when setting it up in the ATEM software? Does anybody do a lot of this in the ATEM world? George Kennedy, go ahead.
How do you designate a box? Well, on the ATM, obviously you would have to physically, for instance, you have to tell it, okay, I want build to go to box 1. Now with MixFX, it makes it super easy that you could just build everything in. Well, there's a companion app for Stream Deck, so I could punch sources into particular boxes. So you have to know where, like for instance, we do it here. Alex might be in box 1 the entire time. And at any given moment, you might need to put someone else in. Box 2 is always going to have someone different, so you have to be able to assign that on the fly. On the ATM, you could physically do it, just a mouse click. With Mix Effects, you're able to either hot punch it, or you could actually build different shot setups in the Supersource interface of itself. So it's pretty easy to do with Mix Effects.
Yeah, and it depends, I think, in part on how sophisticated your mixer is. Some mixers, particularly the real inexpensive ones, may only allow you to put a Supersource box in the upper left or the upper right or the lower left or the lower right. As they go into more complex and efficient generators, mixers, you'll have usually joystick control over being able to create a box and put it somewhere. And then if you have these Mix Effects buses, add additional boxes to it. But it somewhat has to do with the hardware power of your switcher. Jason Panks is coming up next. Let's move to the next question. He says, any consideration to the background focusing on the center of the screen versus the outer edges? Sky.
I think we have a perfect example here in the people that are currently on the panel. I mean, George has a beautiful vignetting, but he's got a little bit of a highlight behind him. But again, you're focusing on the center of where the light is in contrast. You're looking at his eyes, and humans want to see other humans, usually through the eyeballs. Now, again, Tom here has a lot of books back there, but they're in sharp focus. Consequently, it would be very difficult to put a logo over that, because it's like having music with words in it and trying to talk over that. You're confused about, what am I supposed to be looking at? Where am I supposed to be listening? And so consequently, Bill, as a background, has both vignette, both highlighting. And so the question is, should you consider where the focuses are, where the colors are, where the shade, the darks are? I mean, it would be beautiful to put in the bottom right-hand corner a white translucent bug in Bill's, but you would probably also have the ability to do something in the upper right-hand corner. Now, again, over in the left-hand corner, you got the iMac that's all lit up. So now you have to make choices about what opportunities you would put there. Would you put a Supersource over that? Would you put a logo over that? Maybe not, because you've branded a thing. You've got an icon of an image there, even though it's slightly out of focus. So to your,
I want to say that my Mac 128 really appreciates you bumping him or her up in capability to a iMac.
I'm sorry, that 1984 $3,300 that I spent on that exact box.
That's right.
Is in its honored position as an archive piece. But yes, considerations of where are you going to use this? What are you going to put on top of it? Where do you want the eyes to be looking? Think contrast and lighting.
And since we're talking about background specifically, I will say that, remember, you're going to most often probably composite elements into the middle of your background. It would be rare to have the background sitting there and to composite something on the right third line or something like that and leave the background. Although we saw in some of Alex's examples earlier doing exactly that, particularly if you're bringing up text bullets with that as part of your Supersource, offsetting a box with a person in it and then doing some extra content on the other side is a common use case. But outside of that, you're normally bringing most of the weight of the live players in your Supersource toward the center of the screen. So it's not bad to have a background that sharpens up the center, but just know that whatever you're putting there is going to have the biggest chance of getting obscured.
And I will say, the center of the image, again, Tony now has his image on, and I'm looking at his eyes, but I know where those books came from that are behind him, because my father had them on his shelf at home. And so I'm trying to read what is it? Which one is it? Is it which gospel is it? So those are the distractions of my mind.
And that we've talked a lot about depth of field, and that's one of the reasons that backgrounds tend to be soft focus, is because you want to pull the viewer to the main object of that, which is usually the person speaking. So a shallow depth of field and having things in the background a little out of focus prevents exactly what we just saw, which is reading Tony's bookshelf. Now, I think that's cool right now, but in the long run, particularly if you're doing a show, you don't want people reading the books. You want them paying attention to the emotion on Tony's face as he presents. Let's see. I think, George Kennedy wanted to weigh in on this as well. George?
No, I was just a little bit of follow on that. I guess it depends on what needs to be on that background real estate. If we're just talking about a background that's going to have super sources, how many people are going to be on that background. Once you cut to two people, what that background is going to expose. So I guess it depends on all in the design also. Like using like something like a circular background or something with a circular element. When you put two people in the Supersource onto that, it kind of looks kind of weird. So it all depends too on how you're using the real estate of the background. Like right now, the office hours background is not too busy, so it works. It works no matter what kind of shot, Supersource or 3 up, 2 up, 4 up you go to. But sometimes when you get these busy backgrounds and you try to cut to different Supersources or layers, it kind of gets complicated, or visually it gets kind of distorted.
Since we have a hard out, we're going to move on, and we've got about a minute or a little minute and a half or so for each question. George Butters in Halifax, Nova Scotia is up next with, is the office hours background meant to be more than a branded plate on which we display the main course, namely the panelists, the questions, and supporting visuals, or is there more? That would be a question more for Alex and his vision of it, and the team who's working on the background. I'm sure they will bring all of these ideas to the fore. And I for one, there's so much talent here in the background. That's one of the things that's always impressed me so much about office hours, is we've attracted some really, really sharp minds in all of these areas. So I'm looking forward to seeing what the pros in the background of this come up with. Sky, you want to say something real quick?
Yeah, just iterative. I think it's going to be an iterative process. And again, you're always going to find out what you like and what you don't like and what its use cases. So the short answer to your question is yes.
Okay, we got down to that. Douglas Carmichael's up next. For experimenting with Supersources, would the ATEM Mini Extreme ISO be a good choice? How could I generate multiple inputs to it from one Mac? That's an interesting question, George.
From one Mac, I mean, you'll need multiple outputs out of that Mac, and certainly you could go into the ATEM Mini ISO to test it out. So you need some outs. With the M1 right now, you can't do it. But if you have like a MacBook Pro that have 3 outs or 4 outs, you could add some dongles so then get more and test it out that way.
Yeah, that's what I would suggest. I think George is spot on with that. Yeah, most MacBooks, at least, have the ability to do an HDMI dongle out of their USB-C ports. And so as long as you do that, and maybe the Mac Mini will do that as well. As long as you have multiple outs and can assign different windows or different content to those, there's no reason you couldn't take that now translated to HDMI and throw it into a little ATEM and come up with multiple sources on the same machine. You should have enough bandwidth to do that. Let's move on to Alex Ford E. Goldner in London. As office hours is a breakfast show for most attendees, should the Supersource background illustrate that? Oh, gosh. Now we're getting into religion. Should we feature waffles, eggs? There's all sorts of possibilities this opens up. Sky?
Well, as we were discussing earlier, we noted that some of the Supersources or backgrounds that Chris Fenwick was observing were morning shows, and they're going to be bright. Now, I think this is a evergreen show. This is a show that is seen around the world at different times, not at always at when people eat their morning meal. So consequently, I would try to make it a little more ubiquitous and go for the branding of it rather than the time of day.
With our group, as much as I love this group, if we did something like saying we're going to incorporate a steaming cup of coffee or a coffee thing, everybody would be debating for 3 months. French press or drip or.
But even the colors, we saw on the morning shows that Alex had the bright whites, the bright oranges, the bright yellows, and those are morning colors. So that's where, what is the ubiquity of what is office hours? And I like the global concept.
Absolutely. Douglas Carmichael, I guess, as we've kind of gotten up to our last question here in the last less than 2 minutes left to go. He says, I own a Mix Effect Pro license. Would it be worth it to bite the bullet on an M1 Mac to use it on the desktop along with an ATEM Mini? Tom Ferguson and George Kennedy are going to weigh in on this.
Well, either the M1 Mac or I'm thinking more toward the next 12.9-inch iPad Pro.
Ooh, that's an interesting idea. Yeah. George Kennedy?
So I have a couple of M1s, and I have a base, like the base M1 for doing exactly that when I'm in show mode. So yes, if you can, spring it.
Okay, we're in our last minute here, which means at some point I'm just going to disappear. Thank one and all, everybody who stuck with us to the end here. Office Hours will be back tomorrow with more interesting content, we hope, and we thank you for constantly participating in this and helping us bring as much knowledge to the world about this sort of stuff as we can. There's all sorts of 2 more days this week, and I can't remember. I think the last day is the only one that doesn't have a specific topic now. Does anybody remember what the topic tomorrow is? Okay. Well, then I guess we're finished. Thank you all for watching, and we'll see you tomorrow. We're seeing the